All right, so it won't always be the case that your parabola is in vertex form or standard form. So sometimes it looks like this. So this is usually the way we usually see a quadratic. Something squared, something x squared plus bx plus c. And it's really difficult to figure out the vertex of our parabola in this form. So the process that we're going to use to rewrite this form into standard form or vertex form is called completing the square. All right, so completing the square, it's a pretty long process, but we're going to walk through each step. So what we want to do is to determine the standard equation of this parabola, 3x squared plus 12x plus 5, then determine the vertex. So let's go ahead and compare this equation to this general form right here. So here we have our A is 3, B is 12, and C is 5. So we're going to use some of these throughout our completing the square process. All right, so first step for completing the square is to factor out our A in the parts that have an X with it. So I'll write it out in words. Factor out A from the terms with X. All right, so that means 3x squared and 12x. We're going to factor out the 3. So we'll have y equals 3. And so when we factor it out from the first term, we're going to be left with x squared. And from the second term, we're going to be left with 4x. And then we'll have our plus 5. So we should still be able to multiply this back out and get exactly what we started with. So we haven't changed the problem. All right, so the next step is to add and subtract b over 2 squared. So that seems kind of random. We're going to add and subtract b over 2 squared. All right, and so this b is actually not going to be our original b, it's going to be the new b. So for our new b, oops, this is a b, in parentheses. All right, so this is the b we're talking about now, 4, after we factor things out. All right, so we're going to add and subtract 4 divided by 2 squared inside our parentheses. So I'll show you what that looks like. X squared plus 4x, and then we're going to add 4 divided by 2 squared, and we're going to subtract it. And then plus 5. All right, so we can do this, add and subtract the same thing. We're just adding a 0. So again, we haven't changed the problem. I'm going to go ahead and simplify this. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Squared would be 4. So we just added and subtracted 4. All right, so that's the second step. Third step, we now want to remove the last term in parentheses along with its factor of 3. So I'm going to tell you what I mean here. So we can't just take this 4 outside of the parentheses because we still have to multiply it by 3, right? So you have to distribute this 3 first before you can break this apart. So what we're going to do is only distribute the 3 to the last part so we can take it outside of the parentheses. So I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so when I distribute this, we have 3 times -4. So now we've taken that term outside of our parentheses. So we took this and we distributed it only with the last piece. All right, and so then our final step is to factor the inside of the parentheses. All right, so we want to be able to factor x squared plus 4x plus 4. All right, so we want two things that multiply to give us 4 and add to give us 4. I think that will be +2 and +2. Okay. All right, so this is actually the completing the square part that we're doing right now. So we were able to factor this, and notice we have something times itself. We can write that as a square. 3 times x plus 2 squared, -12 plus 5 is -7. And now we have our parabola in standard form. All right, so to answer our question, we have our standard, or we can call it vertex. You'll see it both ways, form. So y equals 3, x plus 2 squared minus 7. All right, and so from here, we should be able to point out the vertex of our parabola. So the x value for the vertex, well, we have +2, but we know it's always the opposite of that, so it should be -2 and -7 is our vertex. All right, and so the reason this is the case is because adding a 2 is the same thing as subtracting a negative. And so that matches up a little more with our standard form. So our vertex is -2, -7. All right, definitely watch this again if you got lost at any parts. All right, so that is the long way of figuring out the vertex of a parabola. We do have a nice little shortcut that we'll explore a little later, but our shortcut is if we want to figure out our vertex and it's in our parabola is in this form, so not vertex form or not standard form, then we can actually use this formula, -b/2a, and then for the x value, and then plug it back in to give us the y value. But we'll talk about this more. So in this section, make sure that you're able to do these things. So are you able to recognize the quadratic functions graphically and algebraically? And also, can you write the standard equation for a quadratic function? And are you able to determine the vertex of a parabola? All right, so if you're unsure about any of these things, make sure you ask me in class. All right, and so then that is the end of this section.